Okay, you can begin now.
Okay. Hello, I am Leslie Suester, and I serve as the chairperson for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic mediums. David Anderson.
Present.
Donna Horner-Queel. If I said that right. Mary Jones.
Here.
Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Jonna Norton.
Here.
Bruce Nystrom.
Here.
Andrea Perdomo Morales.
Here.
Laura Shaughnessy and Rick Steele are not present. Deb Stidham.
Here.
And then Carolyn Zasfran.
Here.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye, Leslie Allen, Cindy Diorcoli, and Ashley Van Buskirk.
I can verify all 4 of those staff members are present on the Zoom call.
Okay. And then Assistant Attorney Generals Lainey Bernard and Jane Weiler are also present. And then
Lainey's here.
Thank you. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about its concerns. The Kansas Open Meeting Act does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals, but individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting today, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the BSRB's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended. As such, we'll be conducting the meeting pursuant to COMA. On July 30th, 2021, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of the board meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted on the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "Request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda.
Thank you. The meeting is now called to order, and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So it looks like the first item is agenda approval. Do you all have a chance to look over the agenda? Is there any changes or anything that you would like to add?
I'd move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll move forward. There's no public comment. So minutes approval for the previous board meeting, July 12th. The draft minutes was in the email that you received.
I have something that I found in the minutes is very minor, where it says HB 2066, looks like an unfinished sentence. At the very end, the agency is moving, and that's all it says. It probably is just lacking forward.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you for catching that.
Make those changes. Anything else that anyone has? All right, we don't have to take a motion if there's anyone that is opposed to the approval of the minutes. Is that correct, David? Since there was a change, we still don't need the motion, or do we go forward?
Since there was a modification, I would recommend taking a vote just because there was a modification.
Okay.
On the minutes. Yep.
All right. So is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes with the minor correction.
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. All right, looks like David, you're up. You've got a long report here, so we'll
Great.
let
Well,
you get started.
Thank you. And I'll try to summarize some of these topics. So first, some sad news. I did want to let the board know that former executive director of the BSRB, Mary Ann Gable, passed away on September 1st. Mary Ann Gable had served the BSRB as executive director for about 20 years. She was the first executive director for the agency. And so I believe that she had served from about 1980 to about 2000. And so when we learned this news, went ahead and I sent flower arrangement to her visitation on behalf of the BSRB. So sad news, but I wanted to let you know about that. And, on behalf of the agency, we appreciate that, the work that she did for the agency. I never had the opportunity to meet her, but 20 years is a very long time to have spent with the agency. And so just wanted to recognize her here. Every board meeting, I've been provided an update in terms of the BSRB YouTube channel. Back in January, we began streaming and broadcasting those meetings on the YouTube channel for the BSRB board meetings and advisory committee meetings. So far, just as an update, as of today, we have streamed or uploaded 29 different meetings, and they have been viewed a total of 658 times. Next item I wanted to touch upon is an item that's been taking a lot of my time recently. The agency budgets are due to be submitted for all state agencies on September 15th, 2021. I've been working on going back over past information. As part of that process, we look at revenue expenditures, we look at revisions to the budgets that were approved by the 2021 legislature. For reference, last year, the agency submitted a revised estimate for fiscal year 2021 and then submitted estimates or requests for fiscal year 2022 and 2023. So for this budget cycle, we are submitting revised changes to those already approved budgets, but it still does take quite a bit of time. There's quite a bit of supporting documentation with those and things to be filled out. Additionally, a few years back, the state implemented a performance-based budgeting initiative where they tie performance measures to the work of the different agencies and look for statutory authorities to those, and they have aligned the due date for that submission with the same due date as the budget. So probably for the last few weeks, I've been spending a lot of time on this. We are on pace to have it submitted by September 15th. The big news is that there's really no big significant changes to the budget that the legislature approved. One item that's going to appear as an increase in 2023 is more of a technical item when the agency received funding to go ahead and create the position, half-time position, in line with House Bill 2066, the military and military spouse expedited licensure bill. They added that funding for 2022, but they did not go ahead and add the funding for 2023. So in talking with our division of the budget analyst, we'll be putting that funding in for 2023 to continue that forward. There wasn't any language at the time of approval that it was limited to 2022. It's just when the budget was really finalized, it just had not been added. And that was something outside of our control. We submit the information back in the fall, but after that point, it's handled by other sources. So just to let you know, that will be showing up as an increase in 2023, but really it's a continuation of what the legislature approved this last year. And I'll share more about any changes to the performance measures and everything else probably the next time that the board has a chance to meet when that's all finalized and submitted. Another item that was due last week was every state agency is asked to submit a 3-year IT plan and any updates and changes. We did have quite a few updates and changes. Projecting out into the future is kind of the interesting thing to do, especially with technology changing so frequently. But one thing with the pandemic, we had a lot more staff members working from home. And so we did utilize different technology for that. And I think, back in the fall, there was the implementation of the online licensing database. We are doing a lot of renewals online now too. when we had the agreement with the Board of Healing Arts, who run our online licensure database. When that came up, I informed you that I had negotiated for some additional language to be included in that agreement about initial licensing moving to the online system. If not to be completed during this next fiscal year, then for us to make some significant progress to that during this fiscal year, and then hopefully that it would be completed during the next fiscal year. But that's definitely something on our 3-year radar. Also, we have a number of paper records here in the office for different applicants, and we have been pursuing ways to try to convert some of those paper records into more of an electronic storage. It should help out with some of our cost in terms of what we're paying to store records here, and also maybe make them more accessible when we need to retrieve records. So that is something not in the very near future, but in the next 3 years, I hope to move forward and make some significant progress on some of those items. There were some other items too, but I just wanted to highlight those for your attention. Under some general operations updates, the pandemic did end in the state of Kansas, at least as far as the state of emergency related to the pandemic back in June. As you know, there are still concerns with COVID-19 and COVID-19 variant. That back in June, the governor had directed state agencies to return to having staff working in the office full time. And so most of our staff had gone ahead and done that as of June 14th. Recently, on August 25th, we received direction from the governor's office to have staff return to working primarily at home. This has caused some challenges, but we are trying to adapt to this new direction. This direction is going to be followed through October 4th, and then it'll be reevaluated probably as we get closer to that date. But when we received this direction to have staff primarily return to remote work, that next morning, I was over at the state surplus office trying to grab as many extra monitors as possible. We tried to learn from our experience this past spring. And one thing that I did hear from my staff was having some better technology, more like an office environment would be helpful. So we did manage to grab a few of those before other agencies were able to grab them. We managed to get some docking stations, we got some cords, and we've been reimbursing staff for some additional expenditures on things that are more helpful at home, things like headsets and different things. So trying to make operations flow as smoothly as possible with this new direction, while also balance, the issues concerning the safety of staff. So next item is during the past month, we did have one of our staff resign. And so we are advertising for a senior administrative assistant position. I've been working with the Department of Administration over the last few weeks to try to get approval to fill this position, which we obtained. And then we made some modifications to the position description and submitted it for approval. And it was posted on the state agency website for jobs. And it is closing on September 23rd. We also added a note to the BSRB website to let individuals know that we are hiring for this position. So once that closes, we'll be able to do interviews and hopefully bring someone in very soon to make sure that we can continue to process applications in a timely manner. And then last item under operations, we did get approval for the halftime position under House Bill 2066, but that process has been much more complicated than I foresaw. Creating a brand new position is kind of a tricky thing to do. And so I've been working with the Department of Administration, and we've been working to try to finalize the description and approval for that position. So working on that, hopefully that will happen sometime soon. We'll be able to go ahead and start advertising for that position as well. Some other updates I wanted to let you know about. At the last board meeting, we mentioned the board governance policy, and the last version of the board governance policy was adopted by the board back in 2011. But since that time, it has not been revised. And in looking at the policy, it appeared that there perhaps needed to be some changes. So at the last board meeting, I indicated that I would review that document and bring back proposed changes or corrections to the document. Well, in doing that, I have spent quite a bit of time since the last board meeting reviewing that document. I also reached out to our legal counsel with the Attorney General's office to get their opinion on some of those items too. And I also looked into just the topic of a board governance policy in general. I asked the Department of Administration because I was trying to find out exactly where this falls in terms of some of the hierarchy of some of these issues. And I asked them how many other agencies actually have a board governance policy or something similar to this. And they were not sure, but they provided me a contact list of non-cabinet agency leaders. and said perhaps it would be a good idea for me to do a quick poll and to see how many other agencies have something similar to this. So I got the list of about 45 representatives from other agencies, created a poll, had some discussion with those representatives. About half the people that I polled responded to the survey, and of those 23 or so, only about 5, well, including us, so about 4 other agencies had something similar to this that they had adopted on behalf of their board or agency or commission. I also reached out to the director of governmental ethics to kind of discuss some of the issues on some of the items that I was seeing in the document. And I think that that's a further conversation that would have merit in evaluating some of those things. But I guess to summarize, there are quite a few items that I'd like to have the opportunity to talk to you all about. And I think when we're revising this document, it's important that we take the time to do those things and to really flesh out all of the issues and to decide, what's the board's preference on some of these things too, because on some of them, it really comes down to a choice. And so what I would propose is, as opposed to bringing them back and trying to do them quickly at a meeting like the board meeting today, is if the board is able to schedule an offsite meeting like the retreat that the board is planning to have, that may be a better opportunity to have more conversation and discussion on those items. So that's my plan, is to, I have a list, but it's pretty extensive. So perhaps a meeting like that would be a better opportunity for the board to really talk about all those topics and issues and to make some choices going forward. The next item is, I want to give an update on SIPAC. So that is the multi-state compact for licensed psychologists. Kansas passed a bill earlier this spring, the Kansas legislature did, to add Kansas to the compact with an effective date of January 1st of 2022. The last time the board met, I had informed you that even though we were not under SIPAC until January 1st, 2022, they did indicate that because the bill had passed, we could move forward and appoint a commissioner to represent Kansas to the SIPAC commission to take part in discussions, and then voting privileges would begin. Voting privileges would begin on January 1st of 2022. So at the last board meeting, the board did went ahead and named me as the commissioner, which was also a recommendation by the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee. So I've been talking with representatives from SIPAC, and they have an annual meeting in November. And leading up to that annual meeting, there are some proposed rules that are open for public comment right now. The public comment period is open through November 4th. And so on the front page of the BSRB, there is a note about SIPAC and about the SIPAC commission and me being named commissioner. There's also a note on there about the link to follow in terms of the public comment. So you can find more information about that on the front page of the BSRB under the update section of the page. Another item I wanted to provide an update on, the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. I noted last time that this was due to the passage of a bill by the 2021 legislature. And this is under the Office of the Attorney General's office. It would use some funding from different lawsuits to establish a Kansas Fights Addiction grant fund for individuals or for groups who might apply for grants from this fund. And it's a little more complicated than that, but I've been working with the Attorney General's office, and they have not scheduled any meetings for this group to meet as of yet. I will continue to track this. At the last board meeting, the board asked me to go ahead and monitor the situation. If any meetings were scheduled, to go ahead and attend and bring back information. And so right now I can report there have been no meetings scheduled, but I'll continue to monitor this and check in with that office. And if meetings are scheduled, I'll attend those and bring back information for the board. And then the last item under those list of updates, the Overdose Fatality Review Board. This was a group that was put together by KDHE. They received a grant from the CDC, and it was proposed in legislation this year. That bill did not pass, but because they received the grant, KDHE is still able to put together a group on a volunteer basis to review cases. The group had met once before the last board meeting. They met again on January 24th. I attended that meeting. The group is really still in the planning stages. They discussed whether any representatives were currently missing from those that attended that meeting. They also looked to see as far as what data they could review and confidentiality of the data, who would be in charge of sharing the data, and then kind of moving forward with that. So as of right now, they have not scheduled another meeting, but I will continue to monitor that. Bruce Nystrom at the last board meeting had indicated that he would be interested in also attending these meetings. So I did forward the information to him as well, and I'll report back if there's any more developments with that group. And then the last section of my report, I'll just kind of touch on a couple of these items here. I wanted to just represent the work of the office in terms of facilitating other committees, board and advisory committee members. We are having monthly meetings to review certain licensure applications under the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act. So we had a couple of those since the last time the board met. And then I've been assisting some of the advisory committees. One item that's been up for a number of the advisory committees has been review of potential members to be added to the advisory committees. So been helping with those committees with that process. And then under the meetings attended or to be attended, one item I wanted to highlight is since the last board meeting, I was able to attend a meeting in person, and that was back August 4th through 6th. This was a meeting that was put on by the National Board for Certified Counselors, NBCC, in Denver, Colorado. It was a great opportunity to learn about a lot of different topics and to share our experiences in Kansas and to hear from other, they had representatives from boards and also administrators of boards who were there. They did do some individuals who had difficulty with travel. They had an opening for someone to volunteer to serve as mock legal counsel on a mock disciplinary hearing. So I participated in that exercise, which was very interesting. It led to some good discussions about how other states deal with their disciplinary issues. And so that was an interesting exercise, and I really benefited from that. I also had the opportunity to really make contacts with a number of other states. One of those was a board from Mississippi that licenses professional counselors. One of the issues that the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee has been discussing has been a proposed multi-state compact for professional counselors. And the Mississippi board had also been discussing that. And in our conversations at the conference, they noted that a representative from the Council for State Governments, CSG, would be meeting with their board about a week after the conference. And I said that I would be very interested in taking part and at least listening into that conversation. And they invited me to attend that over the phone. So heard some information from CSG and the questions that the board in Mississippi was able to ask that representative on the compact, which was really helpful to kind of flesh out some more of those details. So, but with that, I will go ahead and wrap up my report, and I can stand for any questions.
Okay, no questions. We'll move to staff reports. Thank you, David. That was informative. Do we have any staff reports today?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. There you are.
I was just going to go over the numbers that you received a report in your agenda with your board packet. However, I thought I'd just go over it. So we have a total now of 1,016 psychologists, 7,960 social workers, 1,849 professional counselors, and 580 LMLPs, and 1,027 total MFTs. Addiction counselors went down a little bit, 1,488, and behavior analysts went up 281. So we have a total of 14,201 licensees. I believe that the addiction counselors went down a little bit because they were initially licensed in August of 2011. So every, you lose a few more each time. And since they all licensed at the same time, they tend to go off at the same time. So that's all I had. If you have any questions.
Leslie, I think this has been asked before, this Deb Stidham. Do we have trend data over time? Like, is this, the numbers look typical, but I know this is something that people are intensely interested in. Are we experiencing a downward trend over the last 2-3 years? Upward trend, same?
Honestly, we're just starting our trend. The old database didn't give us that ability, but the new one does. So we'll be able to see at least, now. that doesn't do any good with the past, but we can start doing that now.
Well, I know it's not in a database, but we do have old board records.
The,
I mean, we've been getting this report for
Right,
a long time.
I guess we'd have to look because the old database didn't have history. Once it was written over, it was written over. So it wouldn't be accurate necessarily.
Yeah, you would just probably have to do a point in time,
Right,
like pick a month, you know.
right.
That was my question too. I think that'd be real helpful to have our former numbers, if all possible.
So I can pick a date, but if anyone reinstated or it's not going to show that information. So it will only show the expiration date of that month, or if you want me to do several months, I can do that too.
It wouldn't be 100% accurate because you wouldn't have that additional information, but it would give us an idea, I think is what I'm hearing. Is that
Right. Uh-huh.
okay?
How far
Is that
back do you want?
sufficient? Deb, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that we can use at this point. I don't know that it's going to be that different, honestly, at least in recent memory. For my profession, I don't keep track of all the numbers for everyone else, but yeah, anything we can get would be good.
How far back would you like me to go?
5 years. I would just pick a month and then use that same month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't need it to be super scientific.
Okay.
Yeah, just consistent in that point in time.
Okay.
Is that sufficient, Carolyn, for you as well? You had
Oh,
comments.
Absolutely, Leslie. 5 years sounds terrific, and no scientific proof is really needed.
Okay. All right, I'll take care of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Leslie Allen? Okay, we're going to move on to new business. We have a new member. So Donna, welcome. I am going to try not to mess up your last name here. So I thought maybe you could introduce yourself, say your name, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself if you don't mind.
That is fine. My last name is Honer Quayle. So like the bird. Anyway, I'm from Pratt. I'm a retired court services officer, spent 34 years in the criminal justice system. Spent some time in Johnson County, some time in my area now, which would be Anthony, Medicine Lodge, Kingman, Wellington, Pratt. I'm really happy to be on this board. I'm excited to work with all of you.
Thank
So,
you.
okay.
We're very glad to have you. So we want to make sure we give you a warm welcome. So it is different. We're usually in person and we get to sit down and talk and get to meet you. But this is definitely different times we're in. But welcome and thank you so much for being on our board. So we put you right to work and we appoint you to different committees as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We have you as the public member to the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee and the Social Work Advisory Committee. So you will be appointed to both of those committees, and David Fye will get in touch with you about those different meetings if he hasn't already. I'm sure he's already got that lined up for you as well. So welcome to you. Thank you, Donna. Okay, the next thing on the agenda, review of the BSRB website posting policy. That's also in our packet of information. So David, I'll let you kind of take over.
Okay. And actually, I might defer to our representatives from the Attorney General's office. Yeah, there have been some questions about what cases should get put on the board's website and maybe potential adjustments to the board's policy on website posting. So I'll defer to Lainey Barnard and also Jane Weiler from the Attorney General's office to discuss this item.
I'll start. This is Lainey. I'll start, and Jane has some very good practical commentary about some suggestions and how things should work. But That policy is in the packet material. And if you take a look at that, I think there's some questions about interpretation of some of the language in it. And I know it's difficult for board staff to figure out what goes on the board's website. And then there's a secondary consideration of what they have to report to the National Practitioners Database, which is a totally different set of requirements. And sometimes the fact that something goes on the board's website then triggers the need to report it to the practitioner's database. So in looking at that, the current policy in the first paragraph, last sentence, citizens of the state of Kansas and individuals that we license have an interest in being informed when serious disciplinary action has been taken by the board. So I think the first concern is the word serious. What is serious? Who gets to decide what's serious? So there may want to be a review of either deleting serious or defining serious. And then probably the other consideration is the term disciplinary action is taken throughout the policy. And I think even when I first read it, I think discipline. Discipline is not licensing. Discipline is not applications that have limitations. And speaking with Jane on this, she had a very good point that I will let her articulate. If she comes back, she's back. But I think there is a good thing to keep in mind is even if these things are reported to the National Practitioners Database, struggling with that phrase today, but that database isn't something that's searchable by the public. And so I think Jane's comments are even more important when you consider that. So Jane, you're up.
I know I'm sitting, I forgot my statute book. I had to run and get it. Oh, I worked at the Board of Healing Arts, and so I was very familiar with the National Practitioner Data Bank when I came to the Attorney General's office. And so this was not anything new to me. And so I was familiar with what the reporting requirements were and how, so when I started working with the Behavioral Science Board, what we were reporting on the disciplinary side was not anything that I had not heard before. But what I was surprised with is that the application side had not consistently been looking to what is discipline. And actually when, and like I say, what I was familiar with, and we've had a couple meetings, and we had even, Jan Arndt and I had met with Max, even while Max was still there pre-pandemic. So this was something that we've addressed before. And it's basically when you look to the statute where the board is looking to see if they're going to issue a license, that's also happens to be under the same statute that we use for the disciplinary statute. So there's not two different ones when you're discussing, if you're giving somebody a license just across the board with no restrictions, no limitations on it, that does come under the application statutes for what you see as far as like their education experience and that information. But if you're putting some type of a restriction on it, which I'm familiar that there has been, is that if you're telling an individual that they cannot work independently, that they need to have a supervisor, could be because of some type of a previous disciplinary action in another state. It could be that maybe their education wasn't quite with the statutes and you wanted to ensure that there was some type of safety net for the public. So you have the individual maybe supervised. And so that would be an actual, what under the disciplinary statute, that would be a condition. Or maybe there might be a limitation to say that the individual can't work with children. That would be a limitation. Now we would do that on the disciplinary side through the CRC, where we will place somebody in some type of a restriction, a limitation or a condition, something like that. So we call that disciplinary. Well, actually still on the application side, if you're issuing a license with some type of a restriction like that, that still is considered a disciplinary action under your statutes of whichever were, because the language, and this is consistent with whichever practice act we would be looking at, it said the board may refuse to issue, renew, or reinstate a license, may condition, revoke, suspend a license, may publicly or privately censure a license, may impose a fine upon a finding that a licensee or an applicant for licensure. So the disciplinary part of it also falls into that. And when I was with the Healing Arts, when you look at the National Practitioner Data Bank, it discusses one of the terms that they use is that if there is some type of a probation. Now in Kansas, we don't use the term probation when it comes to our administrative law. We call it either like a condition or a limitation, something like that. So that's actually, so that's actually a disciplinary action is, or a probationary term that we would use in Kansas is going to be a condition or a condition or the limitation. So that actually is a probationary term for what the National Practitioner Data Bank, what they would use. Because if you actually look at what they consider a probation, that's what we call it here. So we won't call it probation. It's technically is a probation. It's just not the term we use in Kansas. And that's consistent amongst all the boards. They all would use the terms condition or limitations. And then I think the second part for what Lainey and I had been discussing is the reason is that these are posted, and we did kind of address this last year or maybe earlier this year, was that it's the reason that you make it a public action when you put some type of a term on there, a disciplinary term, so that the limitation or the condition is that it's for the public to make an informed decision. So if they go to the board's website, you know, on the disciplinary side, they're going to go to look to see if they want to have a marriage and family therapist who in the past has had some type of a boundary issue with one of the clients. So this is so that the individual can make an informed decision. So do I want to have that individual be my therapist for whichever issue I might have? Some disciplinary actions might not be as the underlying facts for an issue might not be concerning to the public, but it is something that they needed to be provided to be aware of. And we do that on the disciplinary side, but it is just as important on the application side. So if an applicant comes in who maybe have had some type of a disciplinary action in another state, and so the board wants to ensure that this individual is not running willy-nilly free throughout the state. So the board issues the applicant a license, but they put some type of a condition on it, say that they have to be supervised. And so they're going to be meeting with the supervisor for a year. That's still a probationary term. And that still would fall within why under the disciplinary side, we would want that to be a public document so that the public, because the board's mission is to protect the public. And so you would want to have that information available to the consuming public to make sure that they are making an informed decision if they want to have this individual as their therapist or counselor. So I hope I addressed what Lainey was mentioning.
And I know that Leslie Allen had some concerns that because I think it is confusing if you read that serious disciplinary action. And so, you know, an applicant applies and they aren't under the impression that the limitations on their applications are going to be posted on the board's website. And I know Leslie Allen had some concerns about just making sure that the policy was clear to applicants so they weren't surprised when there are limitations and the reasons for those limitations identified on the website. But I think Jane articulates that well. The whole, purpose of the board is to protect the public. And if these applicants, if the board is issuing these licenses with these limitations, and, there's a good reason why people have limitations on their license, but not reporting them to the board's website, and they may or may not be required to be reported up to the National Practitioners Data Bank, but that's not something searchable by the public. So I do think the aligning that disciplinary action and somehow making that clearer to include limitations on license, just so it's clear, number one, for everyone, but including those, making those types of changes aligns that policy with the purpose of the board.
So Lainey, would you suggest that we amend this document to remove the word serious and then just add conditions, limitations, or disciplinary action as language?
Yes,
And that would.
Yeah, and it probably need to take a close look, because I know the office does struggle, because there's one set of rules. Okay, the first question is what goes on the board's website. And then after that determination, so look at the policy, and then there's a whole second review it's very different about what gets reported up. So I'm wondering if I don't have the specific language or something where we could get the board's policy and the policy about what needs to be reported up, get those aligned better. And I don't have that specific language, but what you're mentioning is what that language would end up to be. So we can certainly work on that. But I do think the serious, who gets to decide what serious is?
This is
Leslie Allen
aligned
does,
with the
I
National
think.
Practitioner Database. This was
Mhm.
edited to align with the National Practitioner Database. This is the same.
I know that when we've looked at it and read through it, and maybe the intent is the same, but I don't think that the word, the serious disciplinary action.
That's meant to be policy. But if you look below it, I think that's the third paragraph is who gets reported. I think that's a policy that might be confusing. But if you go to the third paragraph, that's who gets reported to the National Practitioner Database. So
Right, and there's this whole binder says who gets reported. So yes, this is different than this. You can't include all of this into this.
Okay.
And I just think, and Leslie Allen, feel free to pipe in here. I know she was concerned about making sure it was clear to applicants
I just
what's
don't
going
think,
where.
and it's just a matter of, I don't think that if someone applied for a license and their supervisor was concerned about something they did in practicum, that they think that's going to be disciplinary action. I don't deny, I agree that it should be on the website. I just, it had never been linked together like that. So just that it's clear to them, and maybe that's in a cover letter when we send the CAO or something like that. I just felt like they should be notified.
And nobody wants to be accused of being not forthright. So I don't think, even when I read it, I didn't think it was clear. And then in speaking with Jane, the whole, the reasoning makes perfect sense.
Right.
I just think maybe cleaning it up a little bit would make it more transparent to everybody.
This is Jane again, and I'll say in the orders that we send out on the from the CRC side, we do have a paragraph in our orders that do state that this was a public action and reportable. I can't
Okay.
like all the state. Oh wait, no, that's not one. To all the states and
That would be
something.
good.
And when I have talked with licensees, they are, I mean, because they'll call and they'll say, well, how are you posting this? And I'll explain to them that it's both on the board's public website and also it's being sent to the National Practitioner Database. So on the disciplinary side, we are giving them notice, and it's because that is actually a question that I get a lot. And then we do have our orders that are non-public, and those are the fines for like the CEUs and such. I believe that's, yeah,
Right.
it's mentioned in here. And that even has in there though that it's not public. However, it would be if somebody did a open records request, that we would have to still disclose that it's not a private.
Right. So those
agreement.
would be perfect.
What about changing in the policy statement in the first paragraph? What about changing serious disciplinary to adverse action? And again, I think that and I understand the concern, but that the second was changed specifically to be what the posting policy was, and the first is a policy statement. And so what about for the policy statement for adverse action?
Well, I still like just mirroring what the language of what we're saying, which is condition, limitation, or discipline. I mean, that, because to me, that's what the policy is. That's what we're doing. We post all of that. Correct?
But just an example, Mary, what about like a public censure? You know, I don't want to get too specific. I'm just giving an example. Someone could say, well, I got a public censure. I was just trying to be generic and just use one single word to make it as simple as possible. I'm just saying that because you deal with that broad group of, you have that vast knowledge. And I was just trying to use one simple word.
Well, this is Jane, and I think I would concur with what Mary was saying, is that, you know, if we put the actual terms in there, because the statute has the terms listed, and in the order that is being sent to them, if it's a consent agreement or if it's a summary proceeding order, the statute is included in that document. And so it's a word that they're going to see in the document. And so I think keeping it consistent with the statutes and adverse action, I don't know if that's necessarily if an individual would recognize adverse action. I think trying to keep a little bit, because the statutes are all very consistent amongst the different practice acts. That Jan Arndt had ensured that the language was very, very similar. So the actual document would be a good umbrella to address all of the underlying disciplines.
And Leslie, that would help, like they would say the licensing things, the licensing issues that you're concerned about.
So what, I'm gonna, just to clarify, so what you're saying is the statute says the reasons you can suspend, limit, all of that, he would use all of those terms? Or just some of them?
Like they would say like denials.
Right, well, I mean, there's a whole lead-in when you do the disciplinary statute. It says the reasons the board can deny, limit, suspend, revoke, deny a renewal. You know, are you gonna put all of those in the policy or just the limitation and disciplinary action?
We don't publish denials, right?
We don't
So-
publish denials if they're just, if they don't meet the educational requirements. And knowing now what I know, there are other denials that we should have posted, but we didn't. I know now that I know all of them go to the disciplinary, the national data bank. I'm comfortable and clear with that. I just wasn't sure about which ones went to the disciplinary side on our website. So now there would be more denials that were posted. But I don't think we have to post denials for education, right, Cindy?
This is Jane again, and I can just say that on the, from Healing Arts side, that they would post if the denial was based upon maybe something like a disciplinary action.
Right.
Never the education part, but if they were denied because of something else, under the National Practitioner Data Bank, that was a reportable
Yeah,
issue.
exactly.
They would actually post it on the board's website too.
So think of
Okay.
protect the public.
Right.
That's Mary, how does that help? You know, like protect the public. Like, let's say someone came from another state and had a violation in another state. So we wanted to place a condition on their license. That person, we wouldn't have anything in the state of Kansas to let them know that. So we place a condition on their license to let, so we would push that on their website to let people know. That would be an example.
Right. Okay.
Otherwise, if you, no one would know. And so that would be an example. But to what Leslie just said, let's say we denied a license because they didn't meet the requirements. That wouldn't be, they didn't meet the initial requirements for licensure. We wouldn't post that.
Well, I think the whole preamble kind of sets up the context that this is a policy about public protection. And I don't think anybody would argue that denying someone because they didn't meet the education is anything about public protection. Well,
And
it is
neither of those, and that's also the same thing we
But-
reported to the National Practitioner Database.
yeah.
That's
So
why
what
I
if
think
we-
of them that way too. But think about public protection. So that's why there's also the policy statement. So that's why we report those to the National Practitioner Database. And that's also,
And then, so that would be something Lainey would have to add to our orders for the ones that would be posted. Right, Lainey? That's what
Yeah,
I
we could do that.
understood.
I think we get the policy, the language aligned in the policy, and then we would use the language from the policy in the orders so that
Okay.
everybody's on notice.
So going back to the language, what if we did the condition and whatever else Mary had repeated, and then or other adverse action to encompass these little used, but does happen. So we're covered.
Right. Disciplinary would cover a sanction, wouldn't it?
Do you put public censure in there? Public censure, condition, limit, or discipline, or any other adverse action? Is that too much?
I don't think it's too much. I guess my thinking when I write these kinds of things is what do we do the most often? And then leave the ones that are more outliers for the and all other.
All other actions.
All other adverse action.
Adverse, yeah.
so we don't put anything, just reference. So the reason why this was amended just in 2015 was that we don't put anything on the website that's not related to practice. Just a little background. And so this was purposely done to align with the National Practitioner Database. And that, so like, we're not going to put basically CEU violations up. That was just part of the purpose. And then we don't put warning letters up. And so I think part of that, we're not putting up. So it wasn't like everything that we were, but basically pretty much everything is going up. If you go back to before 2008, we only put up this much. The Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board only put up about a fourth of the actions. And it really was serious actions. And they didn't amend the policy statement when they changed it. And so that's part of the issue I think that you're dealing with now is that policy statement wasn't. So they put up suspensions and revocations. But this is now consistent with other boards where it is changed to what it's consistent with the National Practitioner Database.
Well, I'm all for clarity and making our policy as clear as can be, that anyone could look at that and say, I know for a fact what's going to go up. I think that's what we should strive for. As a secondary thing, when we look at the applications for initial or renewal, is that question clear about have you received any disciplinary action? It's that word, those terms again. We need to put some reference to that and in a to-do list somewhere so we don't lose sight of that. Because what we're trying to gain is, yes, I've had some action, some adverse action since my last renewal. So just kind of putting that out there too.
I can tell you, the main reason that's on there is then someone can't renew online in case there's if they have any action and they haven't done that. So do you want the question to mirror what the policy of the website is? Is that too much?
I don't know. What we see in the CRC is that people don't answer that question correctly and say, I didn't understand it was discipline. And so that, I think, again, as clear as we can be in one spot, have clarity in the other spot so that we can eliminate any opportunities for people to look like they're being misleading in their application process.
Okay. Okay.
This is Jane. I just want to add one more little caveat to this. If the individual doesn't want to be supervised or whatever, if they disagree with that, if they find out it's going to be a public action, they can request a hearing. And then they have the opportunity to try to sway the board into giving them an unencumbered license. So, under the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act, they're always going to be able to get a hearing if they don't want to have a public document.
Jane?
So is this something that we can accomplish today? Can we change that wording? Is it that simple? Or do we need to do some more research into it?
I think probably my suggestion would be to have Jane and I look at it, put it together, and then have the board actually see it in its final format, and then vote to change it or adopt it.
I agree.
This would be my suggestion.
Okay. I agree. Is anyone okay with that? We'll table it. Okay. All right. Great discussion. Thank you. So the next thing on our agenda is discussion of options for offsite board meeting or board retreat. I think David had some ideas he wanted to share.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the governor's direction on about August 25th was for most state employees to begin returning to mostly remote work. And as part of that announcement, it was also some further direction from the governor's office that discouraged in-person meetings and travel and things like that unless it was absolutely necessary. And so, I've had a couple conversations with the chair to kind of discuss, this offsite meeting, this board retreat has really been a valuable resource for the board to allow some greater discussion of different topics. But how do we balance that with, the direction of the governor and also the health and safety of the members who are participating? So an in-person option really seemed very difficult to go ahead and do. It was originally scheduled to be over the weekend of Sunday, September 26th, and then all day Monday, September 27th. But that's going to be too challenging to accomplish in person right now. So one of the options could be to go ahead and find a date that the board could do, a virtual all-day meeting or retreat. But the question really comes down to, is that something that would be what the board would prefer? I know that long meetings can be difficult, especially over Zoom. And so, if that was not something that would be in the interest of the board, perhaps it could be split over a couple days to not have it be an all-day Zoom meeting. But in trying to weigh the pros and cons of these different options, I kind of wanted to bring it before the board, allow the board members to weigh in and discuss what their preference would be. There have been a number of issues we've been tracking that were scheduled to have discussed at this all-day meeting. So I still think that there is about an all-day discussion for the board to discuss certain issues. It just kind of comes down to your preference as board members. What would you like to do? In a perfect world, things would be looking a lot better in terms of the pandemic and the COVID variants, and we would be able to have the meeting in person. But looking like our online option is really the option, at least in the near future, I kind of wanted to allow the board members to kind of weigh in on their preference and see what they might want to do here in the future.
The first thought was something in October, correct?
Correct.
To get things moving pretty quickly. So sometime in October. And I will just say the all-day virtual did not appeal to me. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but it's hard enough, and I do my best to move things along, as you know, but that didn't excite me too much, just to throw that out there. However, we're kind of in a situation, so I thought maybe if we split it up, but then we're all, professionals and we have jobs, and so we have to figure out, okay, 2 days or 1 day or half day at the beginning of the month and the other half day at the end of the month. So just throw some ideas out. What are you all thinking? I really was looking forward to the face-to-face, and so I'm sure several of you were as well. So,
well, personally, I like the dividing of the time. When you say all day, I'm guessing that's 8 hours. So my preference would be splitting it to 4. Primarily all days are hard on your brain. I think I do better in a 4-hour frame than an 8-hour frame. Towards the end of any 8-hour day is hard for, I think, everybody. So that would be my preference.
I mean, even when we did face-to-face, by that last day, we were all kind of checked out. I mean,
absolutely.
It's just human behavior. So yeah. I agree.
I think the advantage of splitting it up is in case there's some follow-up from staff or things that we need to think about, that we could, actually be more prepared by the second day.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
I agree.
Yeah, I think splitting up a couple virtual sessions would make most sense. I don't think anybody can stay on Zoom that long. We do actually, but we break it up.
Yeah.
But even in person, it's hard.
Yes, it is. So are we thinking in the same week? Are we thinking in the same month? How do you want to work that? What are your thoughts on that?
I would suggest within the same 30 days so that we don't, I forget stuff. So
absolutely.
For continuity, it'd be easier.
Mm-hmm.
I like the same month.
Okay. So in October, we could have 2 4-hour meetings scheduled, and then have the follow-up like Deb had mentioned. So I like that idea as well. So David, I think that kind of lands on you as far as that doodle poll that we talk a lot about, just trying to get some dates. So.
Yep, I'll put something together and I'll send more options than I generally send. When I tend to send those polls, I tend to narrow it down to about 5 or 6 options or so. I'll probably send more just to try to cast a wider net, to try to have as many members who can attend these meetings. If possible, all board members, I want to make sure that that look for any kind of conflicts, but I'll go ahead and put that together and then I'll plan to send that out. I'll send you an email when I send that poll as well.
Okay.
Hey, David, and just everyone, we have 2 hearings pending as well, right?
Yes,
Oh.
that is correct.
So October may be a very busy month.
We have CRC too, and
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
And
Yeah, that's-
Kappa.
that's
and-
Just never a good
I think
time.
that's kind of
Yeah.
important.
And I'm just wondering as well, I agree the 2 4-hour days is great. I appreciate the dividing it up, but I still kept on my calendar the 26th and the 27th. I'm just wondering if maybe we could do one of them on that day and then maybe another one in October a couple weeks later, or that's just a thought because I knew we weren't going to have it probably in person, but I still kept it. So I kind of held that day just as a thought.
It's still on my calendar.
Mhm.
It is on mine too, but like I'm sure many of you do, I still schedule things. So
I
don't
was
know.
just
Oh,
going to
yeah.
say that same thing. Yeah, I actually
But,
scheduled to be out of town, but
If that
Mhm.
worked for others, the morning that day would be preferable.
Mhm. I like the morning preference if we select the 27th on
I
Monday.
agree.
That works for me as well.
okay, is anyone opposed to that?
When we say morning, are we talking about 8 to noon, or what are we looking at here?
I think an 8:30 start probably helps people just because some of it.
Okay.
I agree.
I'll put another recommendation in. We're talking 4-hour meetings, and I would also suggest 3-hour meetings and know which topics we want to split up on each day. Again, I just think in terms of people's focus and ability to stay engaged with the material, it might be helpful. Just a thought.
Mhm.
I agree. We'll definitely have it organized where we know exactly what we're going over and all of the information to you all ahead of time. I'm sure David will manage that well. But I like that idea, Mary.
I do too, and I think it supports healthy habits like taking lunch and not working over lunch.
That's right.
I agree. Yeah. So we do a 3-hour instead of 4. Is anyone opposed to that? Everyone's shaking their head. Yes, it's okay. Okay. So we'll do, like, we could even do a 9 to noon on the 27th.
That's even-
Everyone okay with that?
Okay with me.
So we'll start with that one. And then I guess we just have to find another time, early October, to follow up with the additional 3 hours. Wouldn't it be great to get it all done in 3 hours on the 27th? But we'll go from there. So we'll start with that, okay?
Okay.
I don't know that that's impossible, depending on exactly what we want to cover.
Mhm.
Because with
I
this board
agree.
retreat, we would normally have a full board meeting
Yeah.
and still do that. So we've taken care of that today. Well, we're working on it. And so who knows? I don't know what all the agenda is. But
We'll work on it.
Okay, so what I'm
so
hearing is,
9 to noon.
yeah, what I'm hearing, it sounds like is we'll go ahead and have the first part of the board offsite, well, virtual retreat type meeting. And that would be on the morning of September 27th from 9 a.m. to noon. And then I will send out a doodle poll for sometime towards the early part of October to the middle part of October as sort of the retreat part 2 to take care of any follow-up items or have further discussion, which would also be another 3-hour meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone need a break right now while we're kind of in a spot where we can take a break, or does anyone need to take 5-10 minutes? No one's shaking their head. We want to keep moving? Okay.
Can I just
All right.
make one comment, a request for David on that, that date? Can you go in and just revise the appointment? And I assume include a Zoom too.
I will check to see if I can change that. But yeah, I'll go ahead and send that out for that time period.
Either way, I can always delete it. Thanks.
Okay. So I did receive nominations from the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee Chair, Rick, and Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee Chair, David Anderson. And so what I'm prepared to do is appoint the following people. So I'm just going to read this as appointments to the advisory committee. So Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee, I would like to appoint Jessica Hamilton, Tiffany Johnson, and Zachary Parrott. And then Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee, I think I'm saying her name correctly, Lauren Luft, and Carrie Wold, and Rebecca Jabara. So thank you for those nominations. Rick's not here, but thank you, Rick and David. And then our next agenda item is composition of Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee. Dave has a little additional information on that. You want to share, David, kind of give us some history?
Sure. So the behavior analysts were added to the BSRB within the last 10 years, about the mid 2010s. When that group came under the BSRB, an advisory committee was put together, but it was put together a little bit different than some of the other advisory committees. So on most of the advisory committees, there is a professional member who participates in that profession, and then there is a public member, and those are both appointed to serve on those advisory committees. And then the rest of the individuals who are on the advisory committees are practitioners under those professions. The exceptions are the social work and licensed psychology advisory committees, as there are 2 members of the board for each of those professions. So they have 2 professional members on the board and then 1 public member. When the behavior analysts were added under the BSRB, the statute that was changed or added did not call for there to be a member of that profession on the board, but there is an advisory committee, and the chair of the advisory committee is Bruce Nystrom. And previously, when that advisory committee was set up, there were four board members that were on that advisory committee. There was 1 public member, and there were 3 professional members from the different professions. So there were 4 board members, and then the other individuals were representing different interests and practicing professionals in the behavior analyst field. That advisory committee has not met recently, but I've been working with a number of the other chairs for the advisory committees to look into the process of adding members to the advisory committees. And I had reached out to Bruce to see, would he like me to go ahead and send a letter to licensed practitioners to see if there is interest in individuals being added to that advisory committee. And so after we spoke, I sent that out to the licensees and received back responses from about 7 different practitioners who were interested in being added. But since that advisory committee has not met in some time, I mentioned that when it was set up, there were 4 board members who were on the advisory committee. Well, Bruce is the remaining board member. The other 3 no longer serve on the board. So for the advisory committee to meet, one thing for the board's consideration would be there does need to be a public member appointed to serve on that advisory committee. And then I guess the other item would be for the board's consideration, would you like to go ahead and add back 2 other board members to that advisory committee, or would you like to change that so that the representation of the advisory committee is a little closer to that of the other advisory committees? In terms of the non-board members on the advisory committee, I've reached out to those individuals. Some of them indicated that they wish to continue to serve on the advisory committee. Some indicated that they are now in a place where they're no longer able to serve. And I was not able to reach a couple of them. But the question before the board today, I guess there's 2 of them. One is the appointment of a public member to that advisory committee. And then the second is a choice for the board. Would you like to go ahead and have 4 board members on this advisory committee or go to 2 board members? So that's kind of the choice for the board.
And I thought maybe, Bruce, do you have any comments or anything? Can hear from you what your thoughts are as well, since you're the chair of that.
Was, how do you say, surprised when David called me and told me I was chair, because somehow I had overlooked that, and I apologize deeply, and now I realize my role in life. So I don't know, you know, four board members sounds pretty heavy duty. Maybe just 2 and some public members and some actual licensees would be a much better option.
I agree with that.
I do too.
And I think we've kind of talked about Jacqueline Lightcap. If you're interested, I think maybe we've discussed if you would like to be appointed as a public member to that committee. I'm prepared to do that as well if you're still interested. So that would serve as at least the 2 board members.
Yeah, David talked with me about it, and that's fine with me. Yeah.
Okay. So we can at least do that. So I can appoint Jacqueline Lightcap to the, let me think, what, Behavioral Analyst Advisory Committee. So we can accomplish that today. Does that solve that then? That we can add additional public members to that, David?
Yes, since there are still representatives who have been on it before who were willing to continue to serve, I think the next step would be just for us to kind of schedule, I'll work with the chair to schedule a meeting for that advisory committee, and then they can review the letters of interest and resumes from the individuals wishing to be added to that advisory committee. And then we can just kind of go from there. But this helps with some of the setup and some of the questions. So we should be able to move forward now.
I agree. Okay. All right, so I think that handles that. The next thing is updated contractual agreements with National Board for Certified Counselors, Attorney General's Office, and Department of Administration.
So I wanted to make the board aware of 3 items. These are all continuation of agreements, so I don't know that there needs to be an official vote by the board to direct me to take any action, but I wanted to bring these to your attention and make you aware of some of the things involved with these agreements. The first one was, so we belong to, we pay dues to several different associations, in part so that we as a state are able to use some of their licensing exams and things like that. We have a contractual agreement with the National Board for Certified Counselors, NBCC. We had an agreement in 2019, and they recently sent a modification or an amendment to that agreement. And so I asked our legal counsel to review it. I asked Lainey to go ahead and look it over and just to provide some feedback. And she examined the previous agreement and looked at this. This really doesn't, it's not a matter of bargaining for the agreement, but I thought maybe, Lainey, if you might be willing to kind of talk a little bit about some of the items in that NBCC agreement that they're asking us to do, and some things we'll have to work on kind of moving forward.
Sure. So there was just three sections that they went in and made some changes to. The first is essentially a sign of the times, but originally the administration of the exams was at computerized testing and testing sites throughout the US. What they're adding is that they will offer and administer the NCE via online testing at a site selected by the candidate. So essentially internet-based administration, which again, how things are going these days. So I don't think that that's anything negotiable or any legal issues there, but just so the board knows that those tests will be administered in that fashion moving forward. The second provision that they are changing is so I'm going to go back to the original agreement. So initially, the state board would do a review of a request under the ADA for accommodations, then that the board would make a recommendation or notify NBCC of that decision or recommendation about what to do with that request. And then the NBCC would look at it and say, okay, is that reasonable and appropriate under, you know, the legal standards? And so if they did not think it was legal or reasonable or appropriate, they could reject it if they thought it would compromise the integrity, security, et cetera, of the exam. So that's what it was. So they, in essence, were doing this legality review, whether or not the request that came in was something they could accommodate and how they were going to accommodate that under the ADA. And so the change requires the board to establish a processor policy. And so it sounds like essentially what that is some sort of policy. If we receive this type of request for accommodation, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to consider. In speaking with David and Leslie, this is not something that currently exists because that was never the board's responsibility previously. With that being said, my guess is that NBCC has some sort of policy they were using when they reviewed requests for legality. So that was one thing David and I talked about is that is something that the board would have to create. However, there's probably a good starting base, and maybe that might be a request that the board request of David to get from them as you consider the contract. So, and even if not, I don't think that that's a huge undertaking there. I'm sure there are, the ADA is the ADA and everybody does these sort of accommodations. So something that would have to be put together, probably not a huge undertaking. So that was one of the change. And so with the new procedure, the request for accommodation comes into the board does that legality review under this processor policy and then notifies NBCC. They do a second review basically to see if they agree, if there's any sort of issue. There's language about trying to resolve the issue between the parties. Again, I don't think that that's any huge deal. The test accommodation costs, that remains the same. The NBCC will be responsible for all costs associated with testing accommodations. So that's the same. And then what they do add in is that they say that the board acknowledges that only some specific limited accommodations, may be available. So for these internet-based administrations, basically saying, because people are taking these over the internet and are not physically in a physical location taking them, that some of these accommodations that they would have been able to provide previously, they're probably not going to be able to take. And so just a statement there that the board understands that may be something new. So that section, again, I think just getting the processor policy, I think we could get that put together. They've probably got something that they provide as a sample to the board as well for their consideration. And then the last provision is just changing the notices, adding David on as the contact, and then it looks like there's a new NBCC representative. So a couple things to work on, but I don't see any huge legal issues or why not to continue services with them.
Thank you, Lainey. So yeah, Lainey and I had discussed this and wanted to go ahead and move forward with it. And since we have an existing agreement, I primarily wanted to bring this to the board's attention so you would know what's in these new terms and some things we'd be working on together. And if you had objection to it, to let me know. But if you don't, I'll go ahead and move forward and kind of work with Lainey, and we'll try to make sure that this all gets put into place. But like I said, I want to give you the opportunity in case you had any questions or to make sure that you were informed about these new changes. So I guess now if you have any concerns or anything like that, just let me know. I informed NBCC that I would want to bring this before the board before I went ahead and moved forward. So that's what today's purpose is.
Are there any objections to him moving forward? Okay.
Well, the next item is, so there's also renewal, brought several of these, but we're in contractual agreements with a lot of different entities that provide assistance to our agency. One of them is we have a yearly contract with the Attorney General's office for legal services. That did come up for renewal again. In terms of the price of the contract that we have with the Attorney General's office, that did not change. The same amount that we had paid the previous fiscal year, and that was in the budget. So no new items there. I did want to make you aware that when I received that request to sign the new agreement, they did indicate that in the appropriations bill this past year, there was some funding, and I believe it was added for attorneys that work for the Board of Indigent Defense Services. And I believe there was some money added that would adjust their hourly rate. And so in the letter that I received, it indicated that this could impact payment amounts for future services in the future. However, they indicated that they couldn't provide a projection or say that our cost might increase in future years because of that, because they indicated that the price that every agency pays for their individual contract is based on a number of factors, such as, you know, how many hours we might need assistance and the work that we might need to have done, how many individuals might need to provide assistance to us. So those are all factors. And so I wanted to just let you know that for this fiscal year that we're in right now, there's no change in the agreement price that we've worked out with the Attorney General's office. They have given us at least notice that potentially there could be changes to that in future years, but they can't guarantee that that's the case or that our price might remain the same. So just wanted to make you aware of that because I was made aware of it as well. And then the last item in terms of just contracts up for review, we do receive some administrative services from the Department of Administration, things like assistance with payroll, when we are hiring for positions, different things like that. It's a very small amount that we pay to the Department of Administration for these services, but that contract was going up. When I found out that we had received information about the increase in that agreement, I reached out to them to give an explanation of why our rates were increasing. And they did indicate that it's based on a number of factors, including hours and things that we need from their office, but they did reevaluate the amount of the increase. And for an agency our size, they went ahead and adjusted that. So the increase didn't increase as much as previously projected. So managed to save the agency a little bit of money with that contract negotiation. But I will continue to keep you updated on future agreements with the Department of Administration. I do appreciate all the work that they do to help us out with different things. And if that does increase significantly in the future, I'll definitely make you aware of it. But I think the benefit that we get from those services is very valuable. And I think that completes my update on those 3 new agreements. I just wanted to bring those before you and let you know about those. And if you had any objections to any of those or had questions, I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask me about those here.
Is the next item mine, Dave?
Yes, in terms of,
Provisional license criteria. Yeah.
Yeah.
yes.
I didn't pull my agenda from the dining room. I apologize. So I wanted to talk about provisional licenses. I can't remember exactly what year it passed, but we have the ability to offer a provisional license to someone who comes in via standard application or reciprocity. And if they are short something like the last year that they need to practice for reciprocity, that the provisional license could be issued and they could practice in the state of Kansas and then they could be fully licensed. Or if they come in and they're 2 courses short for the LPC, but the degree meets and everything else meets. So there's those kind of situations. The board previously was pretty loose about that. I mean, they didn't have me bring them to the board for approval. So my question, I have a couple questions. One is, do you want all of those to come to the board and seek board approval in the CAPA meetings? And two, if not, do you want to delegate authority to approve those to myself or Dave or both? My thinking is pretty much if they can do it within a year, then they should be issued the provisional license. If it's so many classes that it's not feasible, that would be different. But I feel like if they can do it, they can do it, and they should be receiving a provisional license, just so you know where my mind is. Including the new 2066 people, because they have to practice for 1 year before they can be considered for a licensure in the other state, in our state, if they're coming in. And if they did the provisional, that would allow them to do that. There is another way to do it within the bill itself, but then we would have to create a new type of license, and it just seems convoluted, if not necessary. But those are the things I have, and I would,
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we, continue the way things have been. It hasn't been a problem in the past. And I think, with Leslie bringing this to us, I think from what I understand, she just wants to make sure that it's, all understood that, they've been making those decisions, and they want to make sure that that's okay with the board. So I'm certainly okay with, saying that David and Leslie continue to make those decisions as they always have. They're, in my opinion, the experts on that. So that's where I'm coming from on this. I'm not sure if any of you have any other thoughts or comments. If you want to have us go through all of the different provisional licenses and bring that to CAPA, then that's going to add to our CAPA sessions as well. So just be aware of that. So what are your thoughts as a board?
I just had a couple questions. I think you answered one of them. So a provisional license is 1 year in duration.
yes, cannot
And
be renewed or extended.
how many provisional licenses are you approving right now?
There have only been less than 10. But with the new law for reciprocity, I see that going up. And I feel like it's in line with what the legislature wanted. They want people to be able to get licensed for the military. So
Yeah, I think as we talk about so many of these issues related to getting people licensed versus not getting them licensed,
Right.
yeah, I feel really comfortable in that. I just didn't know what the flow looked like.
And I think, Leslie, I don't want to speak for you, but if there was something that you had a question about, or David had a question about, you would certainly bring that to the board. So I feel very comfortable
Definitely.
in continuing things the way that they have been. So does anyone else have, or anyone opposed or have any more questions or comments about that? Perfect. So I guess
Thank
we
you.
are, as a board, stating to continue things and continue the onus on you.
Thank
Leslie and
you.
David. All right. Old business, forum for future board meetings. David Fye, I'm going to hand it over to you again, because this is something that you have to educate us about, I guess.
Yeah, this is just one thing I wanted to touch upon. I mentioned a couple times earlier about the governor's new direction to have to limit in-person meetings and have staff working from home most of the time. At the last board meeting, the board did have some discussion and actually made decisions in terms of which meetings the board wanted to have in person or online in the future. And so I just wanted to add this as an agenda item to clarify that for the time being, I think what I would recommend doing is pausing those recommendations, those decisions. And then once we get direction that in-person meetings can be held safely, then we can return to the board's previous direction in terms of which meetings should be held in person. But since that was something the board had a good discussion upon last time, I wanted to just clarify that the decision was paused for the time being, and we return to it when we get more information in the future.
Most of you probably had that in your head anyway, that it had to be virtual, but I think it's good to bring it up and make sure we're all on the same page. So thank you, David, for doing that. We will move forward with just virtual until further notice. So, okay. Review of applications for individuals who receive their education from an institution, it's a long one, not accredited by a national accredited body. So not sure who's going over that one.
That one I can talk to a little bit.
Okay.
So we've talked a little bit in the past year. The board has done some work on this topic. Earlier in very early spring, we had come up, we worked with legal counsel to come up with a contract so that we could begin the process of contracting with an outside expert or an expert witness who could do a review of the licensure qualifications concerning institutions that were not accredited by the national accrediting body, or look at the coursework to see if those were substantially equivalent to Kansas standards. But it would be as a person that the board would use outside of the board members, so that there wouldn't be any issue with a board member making that decision, and then the rest of the board maybe considering it upon appeal or something like that. So at the time, we worked on and finalized a contract, and we worked on delegation motions to give me the ability to contract with individuals for that purpose. And I wanted to let you know that since the last time the board met, we have managed to reach agreements with 2 different people. The number of applications we had for most of these cases were professional counseling. And we reached an agreement with Andrew Secor, and so he is serving as the outside expert currently for the board for professional counseling cases. And so he's reviewing those cases that fall into that category where the board is not able to make a decision until we have that review and report. And so he is doing that for the professional counseling profession. Also, we've had a number of cases that have popped up recently that have involved addiction counseling. And so we have reached a contractual agreement to work with Kendall Carswell, who was previously on the advisory committee, and Kendall is serving as the outside expert in terms of reviewing some of the qualifications for licensure candidates in the addiction counseling profession. So appreciate the work of both of those individuals. I think that's going to be very helpful for the work of the board, and also us going forward and making sure those get reviewed in a timely manner. I have still had some ongoing conversations with, you might recall, we did bring in a company who does licensure reviews from out of state. That company had indicated that they normally do things a little bit differently than how our board was looking at them. They indicated that there is one other state that does things a little more similar to what we were requesting, and that is North Dakota. So I did set up a meeting to talk with the representative of North Dakota to hear about their experience working with that licensure company. I had a good conversation with the person. We talked about sort of what they received from the company and what we're looking for. And what I took from that conversation is that the North Dakota executive, they indicated they had a very positive experience working with that company. But I think in going through the details, what they have is a little bit different from what we have. It seemed like what they were using it for was more of a second opinion type process versus somebody going through and doing the initial type review. And there is still the issue of some uncertainty in the cases where we have an outside expert that we hire here locally. If there is a hearing where we need someone to come and explain the report, or at least provide additional documentation, that is something that we could have happen. Whereas with the company, it was a little unclear exactly how they would provide supplementary materials for a hearing. So I say this just to illustrate that we have continued to have ongoing conversations, but based on the differences in the contractual agreements, I am still open to discussing more items with that outside company. But I think for the time being, we've made some good progress at the number of applications that were needed to be reviewed. So I think going forward, we probably will rely upon the outside experts we've contracted with. If things become more of a problem, if we get a number of applications in the future that might need this level of review, might bring back to the board some considerations of returning to the negotiations with that company. But for right now, I think we're probably in good shape working with those 2 individuals we've contracted with to review those applications. So wanted to touch base with you and tie up that loose end after our conversation last time.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is seeking expiration dates for multiple licenses under the BSRB.
Yeah, and this is an item that the board talked about at the last board meeting. We mentioned that there's about at the time, 14,100 licenses, but there were closer to about 13,000 licensees. And so there's about 1,000 people, a little over, who have more than one license with the BSRB. And the question was, we have received a handful of requests over time for individuals who wanted to sync up the expiration date of their licenses so that they would all come due at the same time. And so the board had a conversation about, is that something to move forward on? One of the questions was, there are some benefits to having them all together, but it might be easier to remember when you need to make sure that you pay the licensure fee for those renewals. Another consideration might be, do you want to have all the costs coming up the same month for all of your licenses as well? So the question was, is this something that licensees are in favor of? Because right now the length of time for those renewal cycles are set in statute. So for the board to approve any request, we would need to get authority and put that in legislation to be able to adjust some of the changes. And then there were some other options in terms of, potentially changing the way that we have license come up for their renewal cycle, in terms of maybe aligning it by calendar month or other processes. But I think at the last board meeting, what the board had discussion about was some interest to see those people who have more than one license, what would be their preference. And so I looked into some different ways that we could potentially collect that interest. And I talked a little bit more with the chair of the board about that as well. One of the things is our primary polling mechanism we're using right now is the doodle poll. And the doodle poll is limited to about 49 people. And so to do a poll of that many licensees would be a little more challenging. For some of the other items, we've sent letters to licensees, but collecting all of the responses back from about 1,000 people and sorting those was going to prove difficult. So had further discussion with the chair and thought might be helpful if the advisory committees do represent the licensees. And perhaps this could be a discussion topic that maybe the advisory committees could have a discussion on, and then bring back recommendations to the board on whether the advisory committees were supportive of changing statutes to be able to sync the licenses, or perhaps another way that licenses come due. But wanted to bring back that I did research this, had a number of conversations about this topic, but wanted to see if that would be an option that perhaps the board might be in favor of, in terms of the advisory committees having that discussion and providing it.
Yeah, I think it's what we had talked about, David and I. It's funny, he calls me the chair because we have two Leslies. So the chair. When we were talking about it, that's a lot of time out of David's day to collect all of that information. So I thought maybe if we could go to our advisory committees, that's where we're, our licensees are represented, and find out, what they're thinking, and if we need to look further into this. We did also have option if the person wanted to do that. So people with multiple licenses, if they chose to do that. So I think I might have froze up there. We're good. Anyway, so I think we could maybe go to our advisory committees and bring back information if you all are okay with doing that as well.
That sounds good, but I was wondering if we had any other form of survey that included more people than 49, such as, monkey survey, or just a question.
Well, I was going to suggest, Carolyn, on that, if you guys have Microsoft products, you can make a Microsoft form essentially with a little bit of expertise. I don't think it takes that much, and you can send the link out and it tabulates and does everything for you. And we've utilized a lot of those over SurveyMonkey and that kind of thing. But, yeah, initially I would say these are great ideas, because I think cost would be a factor for people. And I also think the CEUs would be a factor for people. Your licenses carry different requirements. And so spreading that out, I think, is an advantage. But I'm sure there will be the same people saying we should sync them up and make it easy. But that would be strange if someone started a license and then was due in a couple. I mean, it could just be logistically strange, but. And I'm always in favor of not changing legislation if we don't have to. So there's my bias coming into it.
It's true.
And I was, Mary, initially when I brought it to the board, it was just a very small number of people asked for it, probably less than 10 a year. And so it's not huge that, you know, that the board wants to, I mean, you guys decided that it might be better to make big changes if we were going to do it, but just the initial problem wasn't really a problem. It was just a request.
Yeah, gotcha.
Hey, Leslie, it's Lainey. So is there anything that would prevent a person from renewing early to get on track? I don't think a person would want to expire and wait and then, you know, reinstate, pay the fee to get on the same track. But I mean, is there any prohibition of a person reinstating early? They might lose a bit of money, but if it's really truly that important to them, I mean, is that a solution for them?
To renew early would not
Mhm.
change the expiration date.
Mm-mm.
They keep that the same.
There's no way to adjust that.
No, and that's initially before Jan told us we shouldn't have done that. We had done that with one person as long as they weren't gaining time. Then
Right.
then we synced them. But then Jan said that we shouldn't be doing that. So
What was it, 8%, David, that held at least dual licenses?
Yeah, I would say out of about 13,000 licenses, there's about 1,000, maybe 1,100 people who have more than one. So I think it's around 8 point something percent.
And I would say if we continue to get those requests, you know, we can bring it up again. If, you know, if we don't change anything now, we could always do that in the future. So. Okay, so we're moving on then. Everyone okay to move on?
Was the determination, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Deb, go ahead.
I just wondered if we're tabling it then, if
Yes.
you want us to talk to people.
Yeah, I think that's what we had talked about is we'll let the committees, people
Okay.
take it back to their advisory committees if that's okay. And then
Sure.
we'll bring it back.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. All right, we're moved on to the complaint review committee report.
Okay, I like to start this by recognizing the committee and the staff, Cindy, Joan, Jane, that for those who may not know, and I'm going to keep telling you this committee works hard, really, really hard. There's tons and tons of cases that come in every other month, hours of reading, and it's not real easy reading because it's all complicated and contradictory and all this and that. You're making really big decisions about someone's career and safety and protection and all that stuff. So yeah, it's yeoman's work, and I think everyone associated with it needs a big congratulations. The report you have in front of you shows we're into a new fiscal year, so the current year has very short data. It shows July, we received 14, closed 3 cases. In August, we received 8 and closed 15. Down at the bottom right-hand corner of that page is a summary of the past several fiscal years and the number of cases open, and then you'll say 0, 3, 1, 1, 5, until you come into 21 and 22. It's 39 and 21, and so far in 22, it's 21 cases open. And Cindy, I don't know, do you have a feel for this? Is this just a result of more and more cases coming in, or why is that? Why are those numbers expanding? So
You're muted.
Okay. I'll step back first and say, so there's two statistic sheets that we do every time for you. One is the report of alleged violation sheet that Bruce is talking about, and that's the cases, the complaints that come in every month. The other sheet is the disposition of cases, and those are the cases that come to the CRC. The cases, the little boxes he's referring to, those are the cases that remain open. And so that's actually a good thing. So for fiscal year 2012, there are no longer any cases open. For a long time, we had cases that were that old that were still open. So now we have one case that from fiscal year 2017 that's open, that remains open. We only have 8 that are still open from 2020. And so what this means is we've done a really good job of going and closing our cases, of getting them through the system. And that would be, I think, comparatively, because close your ears, Jane, because we're doing a better job of pushing them through the system, and Jane does a better job previously than closing them. Why do we still have some open from way back to 2017? Sometimes we just can't control everything. There's an attorney, somebody appeals. Sometimes like 2019, we can't find somebody. You know, there's a lot of things we can't control, but that's why we still have 3 open from 2015. That's one that's a complicated one. But those are why they're still open. But that's what that little box means. The next page of the reports of alleged violations, which is what we call complaints. That's I don't know if we've ever explained these. We keep a lot of statistics. We keep a lot of records, and we try to keep them accurately. The first box tells you cases that are open. The second box tells you cases that are received. So we are talking about cases that are open. So sometimes, again, cases can stay open for a long time, and they might not be indicative of what we're doing this year. The cases that are received are what are indicative of what we're doing this fiscal year. So in answer finally to Bruce's question, last year was a very strange year. It really can't answer a lot of things about last fiscal year. This year, we're back on track to what it might be, back to a new normal of what we're doing. But the little box that what Bruce was looking at, that's cases that are open, which I think is, you don't want to have cases open for a long time. Are they sitting there? Do you have 20 cases open from 2017? You want to make sure you go back, and we do a really good job of making sure that things aren't sitting there. I think that's one of those things, and that's why you have good records, and we do a good job about that. I wanted to just point out one other thing. This is actually on topic. We do a lot of other things, like keeping records that don't have to do with investigating cases. You'll notice on the disposition cases, we only had 20 cases. We have had as many as 41 cases come through, and that's because this summer we've had a lot of staff time going on looking at the disciplinary database. You've heard about our other database, EMLO, that we're able to have, that's going to give us a lot of other capacities. We couldn't integrate our disciplinary database into our licensing database. So we had to go through manually and attach unique identifiers to the individuals. So that, manually means go through and attach individually. That was really difficult because is John Smith, John A. Smith, John C. Smith. Also, a lot of people change names over the years, but that's what we do to get good data. and it's going to help us in the long run, but we just couldn't just download data. We just couldn't like you think computers just happen magically, and they don't. But in the long run, it's going to help us. But those are things that we investigators don't just investigate. And those are some of the things that we do. But it's going to help us in the long run. And we also got better data on it. We found a lot of mistakes. Okay, we found some mistakes. Do you guys have any questions?
I have one question, and I want to know in terms of just our individual professions, if there is any way to have a history of or a trend of cases opened in each profession. I mean, I think for social workers it'd be really helpful.
So on the second page, Carolyn, of the report of the statistics, it says August 2021 cases opened by license. That is one of the statistics that we keep. And so for right now, it's broken down by each license type.
Yes, I'm just wondering if we have pre-existing or
Yes.
historical boxes that, you know, I mean, I could do that myself just of interest to, you
Yeah,
know.
we do have that. So yeah, we do have it historically, and just in generally for everyone, it seems to correspond to the number of licensees.
Right.
And so it is, so I'll just say like, you know, 50% of our licensees are social workers,
Mhm.
and about 50% of our complaints are against social workers.
Yeah.
And so they do tend to correspond. You know, you might tend to have something that seems strange, but it could be that we've had a complaint open for 3 years, or
Sure.
5 complaints open for 3 years against individuals who happens to have a certain license, and that might skew some of the data.
Okay, just one quick question. If I were interested in finding, you know, the other charts, would I go through you?
Sure.
Just for the
Also,
purposes
have we been
social
writing
work.
over the data that we send to them?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Leslie, when we send them the new, or Dave, when we send them because this has been sent out to you every month. Do we write over each month? Okay, so yeah, I can send you one, or yeah, you can come to me. But so
Well, I won't take much more time, but I can come to you.
yeah.
We do actually, we write over it in the iPads, but we do actually save each month as a historical board packet. So you could go back to any month.
Yeah, well,
and
no, I
find
have
it.
it too. I mean, I have it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because it was sent to you at one time. I just didn't know if it got written over when it was sent to you. So yeah, you tell me what you want, Carolyn, and I can find it for you.
Okay, thanks a bunch.
Yeah, I keep everything.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I guess I've probably read this accurately, but I'm not sure I've used the data in my mind accurately. So when I look at the LAC, LMAC, LCAC, and especially when there's any discussion about, I guess, increased oversight in statute or regulation of the addiction counselors, I've always looked at these stats and say, well, look, we're doing really well here. But then Cindy's comment about, well, compared to the number of licensees, it may not be as, you know, hearts and flowers as it appears on this document. So, I mean, if I wanted to use this data to make a good case that we're doing okay, we could, but I don't think that is accurate. So I'm wondering if anyone else would like another column that says what percentage of the number of licenses that is. Because to me, that's a much better indicator of where we are.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Deb. It's like taking a little bit of Leslie Allen's report and putting it with this one. So you have that context to
That
help
could be
us.
something that we could do at the end of the year. And that's what Dave has, that at the end of the year that he puts in the budget document. And I would just add something for you, Deb, is that LCACs are not reflected accurately in this because we can only do one license at a time. And so a lot of LCAs have another license. And so we just put down their primary license. And so that's why there's only one LCAC, and we usually put down, a lot of LCACs are LSCSWs or LMFTs, and we usually guess when we first get into the complaint that they're not using their LCAC, and that might not be accurate. And so you're guessing, how come we only have one LCAC? Well, it's because they have two licenses.
That was going to be my question.
Register one complaint at a time in our database.
So if a complaint is made with somebody who has multiple licenses, is it made against a specific license?
It's often not made against any license. They don't know what license they had. It's made against an individual. And so it's we tell people, hey, just send in a person.
But then it's counted against whatever you perceive to be their primary license?
We're making a guess.
Right.
So we're assigning it in our database. And Jane, she might be able to articulate this better, and members of the CRC can. We want to protect the public by letting them know the individual. It's not the license that's the issue, it's the person. And so just imagine that you don't want that person to go practice under another license and that somehow protect them. It's the person that's the issue, not the fact that they violated the social worker unprofessional conduct or the LCAC. It's the fact that this person did this. And so that's what when we are reporting it to putting it on our website, we're just putting a dot on our database, and that's what the reflection is that you see, and that's what we're worried about. And so later on during the investigation process, we will find out that they were practicing using their LCAC or their LCMFT, and sometimes it's both, or you can't tell, but it comes down to they were practicing and they did or didn't do something.
So for purposes of this board, then I think the request is just some more, maybe deeper level of statistics. Yes. Excuse me. Is that what I'm gathering?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
For me, yes, and from the social work profession. I also think at some point, and I don't know if our computer has the capacity to do this, is to track the types of violations, just general. Can't do that.
No, we don't have this is the reason why we don't have the capacity. I mean, we for our budget, we do for the year end. And you're on the CRC, Carolyn, so you know this, that there's 5 violations or there's 1 violation. And so the amount of, it would be, this long. And so for the end of the year, we could do like an average, but we don't have the capacity in our database to do that. And that could be something that we request with our new disciplinary database to have those, those boxes checked, but it's definitely not something we have right now with our access database. But we have people that have 3 violations. We have people that have 6 violations. But we can tell you what the 4 most common violations are of people. We can definitely do that, but we do not have the ability to assign it on our database to someone.
Okay, I understand. Maybe for future data improvements, that would be something of usefulness, I believe.
And actually, I found out just by something that we were doing that actually not near as many people have multiple violations as I thought. But right now we don't have that capacity. We're just actually figuring out, because we're designing the new disciplinary database, what we wish to have for the future.
I'm going to weigh in here for a second. I do like statistics quite a bit, and what I'm hearing from members of the board is that you'd like some more detailed information on some of these disciplinary breakouts. And there is a way to categorize the information in a certain way, and it sounds like we can do some improvements in terms of tracking things a little bit. So we'll work with the people from the IMLO system to see if we can start collecting some of that information. And I'll work with Cindy to see if we can add a little bit more on these types of reports so that you can see some more of what's going on. Too.
And I think the Board of Healing Arts, I think AMLO, I think that's built into their system. I think that's something they have a very, I'm going to use the really fancy word, fancy, that I think that's something that they already have built into theirs to do, that wouldn't be that difficult.
That means we can have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Jane, did you have something?
Or at
to
least
add?
some part of it.
Mhm.
And I'm excited because I think that could be useful to universities in terms of showing people what training might be needed more. You know, I'm sure a lot of them categories fall into boundary issues and stuff like that, but
And please renew your license. Jane, did you have something to add?
I just want to make sure that, and I think this kind of maybe echoes what Deb had alluded to, is when I draft an order, if the individual has, if they're an LSCSW and they are an LCAC, in what orders I draft, we take action on each license. And so the social worker statutes are in there and the addiction counselor statutes are in there.
Mhm.
So if they are duly licensed, both licenses are having action taken against them. So we don't pick which license we're going to take action against. We take the same action against both licenses, and they're contained within the same document.
It just doesn't show up on our database. We just don't have that capacity in our database.
All right, so David and your staff can work on that for the board then. Thank you for that discussion. All right, so we're moving on. Cindy, did you have something else? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, sorry that took so long.
No, that's fine. We're good. So professions reports, we're starting with licensed psychology.
And Leslie, I can go ahead and
sorry, that's
cover
Rick.
that one. So Rick is not in attendance today, but I was at that meeting with the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee. They did meet on August 10th. They received an update in terms of the SIPAC commission, but the main work of the advisory committee at that meeting was to select new members of the advisory committee or to recommend new members for the advisory committee. They did have 7 individuals who had applied for consideration, and they went ahead and recommended 3 individuals who were listed on the board's agenda today. So their next meeting will be in October.
Thank you. Social work, Carolyn?
Carolyn, you're muted.
thank you. All right, we were to meet August the 17th, and we were working on the agenda for that day. That was canceled, and our meeting has been rescheduled for October the 19th, Tuesday at 1 o'clock. And when we were looking at our last August meeting, we were taking a look at the procedures of the application process because we were in process of looking at adding 3 more members. And we have quite a few applications, so a way to organize that to make sure that we're looking at all sorts of diversity issues, including geographical areas, covering many other types of inclusive characteristics, such as the type of practice, level of practice, etc. So I believe was our main focus.
Okay, thank you. Professional counseling.
I can go ahead and cover that one as well. So on behalf of Laura Shaughnessy, the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee did meet on August 2nd. And one of the items that advisory committee has been looking at is that proposed multi-state compact for professional counselors. I provided some information to the advisory committee. 2 states have passed it, and that is Maryland and Georgia. And I presented some information on the hearings that Maryland had when that bill was passed, which was 2021 Senate Bill 571, and provided a link to their legislative website. They have some neat tools on their legislative website that lets you go to the actual hearing and the point in time. I was going to summarize the testimony that was provided when that bill was heard, but they had quite a bit of testimony. So I gave them the tools to go ahead and look at that. And then the other item the advisory committee discussed was continued discussion upon retention and disposal of practitioner records, and also continuing education hours and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at the next meeting, they intend to go over individuals who have applied for consideration to join the advisory committee. And I believe they will be meeting in October as well.
Thank you. Master's level psychology.
Yes, thank you. We met on August 17th. The majority of the time we spent reviewing applicants to be on the advisory committee, and appreciate the chair's appointment of those individuals. For reasons I don't fully understand, we've had advisory committee members for really long periods of time, some 15 years plus. And so we've really been working to move some people off and get some new folks on. We put 2 new ones on last year. We're adding 3 this year. And hopefully by next year, we will have everybody on in kind of a staggered formation so that we can, in the future, rotate people off and yet maintain some folks who have some kind of continuity of what the committee's been doing. Also, we discussed records of deceased providers, the 988 National Suicide Prevention Hotline, issues around the continuing education requirement proposal in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a discussion about the in-residence educational requirements. We will be meeting next with our new professional members and our new public member as well. Donna, welcome to our group. I believe that is scheduled on October 21st. Thank you.
Thank you. Marriage and family therapy, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. We have not met since the last board meeting. We're scheduled to meet October 8th, but since I was absent the last board meeting, I'll just say that what we talked about in the meeting prior to that, which very similar topics, the records, custodian, having a appointed record, custodian of record. We have talked about the continuing education, and we'll continue to look at those topics in our next meeting agenda. We were in a situation where we weren't quite ready to add new members, but next year we'll be looking at that. So I'm glad you all are putting the process in place for us.
Thank you. Addiction counseling, Deb.
Addiction Counselor Advisory Committee did not meet since our last board meeting. We meet again on September 24th.
And then David with the behavioral analysis, you or Bruce, one of you want to report anything?
Well, so that advisory committee, like I said, it has not met. I think the last meeting was in 2018, but now that we have a new board member on that, and I'll go ahead and work with Bruce as the chair of that advisory committee, and we'll try to get a meeting scheduled so that the members can review those applications and submissions.
And I think it was discussed where that board or that advisory committee could meet once a year, and then if they chose to meet more often, that's a possibility as well. So I wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, I think, this advisory committee has not met in some time, but as it is one of the advisory committees under the BSRB, I thought it would be helpful to allow the opportunity for members to, bring forward ideas and potentially suggest things for the board to consider. So at least meeting annually would be a hope, expectation. If they needed to meet more frequently because the board asked them to look at something or something like that. But this may be something that starts off a little bit differently than some of the other advisory committees, but I think it'll be helpful to hear from some of those practitioners as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, if that is all for the professions reports, then we have adjournment if someone would like to make a motion.
I move we adjourn.
A
Do I have a
second.
second? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hey,
for all your
Leslie
time.
Allen, before you take off, can we get a phone call real quick? 5 minutes.
Sure,
Okay, bye,
You
everybody.
want to call me or do you want me to call you?
you can
Thanks.
call me. Well, I'm on my cell phone. I'm at home.
All right, we're going to end the broadcast of this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.